Welcome to Overcaffeinated and Out of Effs, the podcast for burned out, career-minded moms who are ready to stop pretending everything's fine and feel like themselves again. I'm your host, Christy Gamir, burnout coach for moms, licensed therapist, and mom of two. And I'm here to help you reclaim your energy, your identity, and your peace of mind. Whether you're lying awake thinking about the 87 things you didn't get done, or silently resenting the people you love most, this is your space to feel seen, supported, and not so alone. So grab your coffee, hot, cold, or day old, and let's get into it. Hey everybody, it's Christy. Welcome to Overcaffeinated and Out of Effs. In today's episode, I'd like to welcome our guest, Kelly Lippenholz. Kelly is a communications speaker and trainer who helps HR leaders and people managers tackle one of today's biggest workplace challenges, leading and engaging a multi-generational workforce. With up to 5 generations working side by side, Kelly equips organizations with practical, human-centered tools to reduce conflict, improve communication, and strengthen connection across age groups. A Maxwell Leadership Certified Coach, Kelly specializes in multi-generational leadership, relational intelligence, and people skills that drive retention and resilience. Her work helps leaders move beyond generational stereotypes and instead adapt communication, feedback, and recognition in ways that make employees feel seen, valued, and motivated. With more than 20 years of experience in education, nonprofit, and corporate environments, Kelly understands the pressures HR professionals face, from disengagement and burnout to culture gaps and turnover. Her sessions combine actionable frameworks, authentic storytelling, and a healthy dose of humor, making leadership development approachable, relevant, and immediately usable. So I have invited Kelly here today. She's going to talk a little bit about, her own personal story and her own experiences with burnout. And one of the things that she had mentioned earlier is that she was especially affected by dealing with complicated or difficult people, right? So we're really going to spend some time talking about how that affected her and how people can manage those kinds of situations, those sort of relationships themselves. So Kelly, thank you so much for being here today.
Hi. Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yes, great. I'm so excited to have you. I'm wondering if you can start off by telling us just a little bit more about yourself. And I'm curious to know about the season of motherhood you are in right now.
Okay, yeah. So I'm 53 years old, and so I have 2 children. They're both boys, college age boys. I have a 23-year-old and a 21-year-old. And so that has been a very interesting stage of motherhood to go through. I know that motherhood is like I heard that it feels like someone is constantly breaking up with you over 25 years. That's so sad.
Oh my goodness.
Don't
That
like to think of it that way, but I'll tell you when your child becomes a young adult, it does kinda start to feel like that. It's been a challenge to just kind of back off and let your kids make the decisions they're gonna make. You have no control anymore. So that's the season I'm in right now. It's pretty difficult, but it's also great because 'cause they're just becoming, their own wonderful, great people and, you know, great young men. Um,
yeah.
so I'm a former teacher, and I worked in, high schools and middle schools, a little bit of community college, and then for many years, I worked in church ministry. I was a youth minister, at a large local church, and then I did some other jobs at the church as well. And so about a year ago 2 years ago, I left my job and started my own speaking, training, and coaching business.
Wow. Okay. So you've really done a lot. And when it comes to parenting, you are pretty far into that into that journey. I know all the stages are very different. I'm sure pros and cons. You talk about, now having to deal with and getting to deal with them sort of like moving on and becoming themselves. I imagine that is probably in a lot of ways a really wonderful and challenging place to be.
Yeah.
Um so I know that you used to be a stay-at-home mom, correct? And then you re-entered the workforce, you said when your kids were 5 and 7. So when they were, pretty young. I know
Yes.
that that is a real challenge for a lot of women. After we have babies, a lot of women sort of pivot and shift, sometimes step back in their careers, and then maybe want to get back into it later. And they talk about how hard that can be, having that time away, trying to readjust, figure out the way their particular industry operates now differently than before, all of that. And so I'm really curious to hear from your own experiences what that transition was like, being away for that extended period of time and then coming back into it.
Yeah, well, I had the luxury of being able to do it gradually, which if I would say, like, if you have the luxury to kinda dip your toe in and go back to work gradually, that was a really great way to do it, and I'm so grateful that I was able to do it like that. I was I started just, like, substitute teaching, and I started volunteering at the church, so that's another thing. If you are in, like, the nonprofit world or service industry and there's a way that you can volunteer, that's a great way to ease back in to work. And so I was volunteering at the church and I was teaching, doing some long term sub positions, and I was ready to go back. I had stayed at home for about 8 years,
Okay.
7 or 8 years. And I will say I would have been a better I think I would have been a better mom had I worked part-time or worked a little bit more during that time.
Can you
I
say
need
more about that? I'm curious why you feel like that would have been better for you.
I need people. I need
Mhm.
human interaction and adult interaction, and I mean, I loved staying home with my kids. I played with them all the time. We went on scavenger hunts and hikes and we did all the things that, young stay-at-home moms do. We had a really good time, and it was good time together. But, however, on the other end of that, there were days where I just felt like I didn't wanna do this anymore. I'm sure every mom feels that. I just want to escape. I wanna get out of here. I wanna go to work for 8 hours a day. Wouldn't
Mhm.
that be nice, right? I mean, we've all heard the argument over the years between, like, should I stay at home or should I go to work? And the benefits to mom and the benefits to the kids and blah, blah, blah. We don't have to have that discussion. But I personally would have benefited from, gosh, I hate to say it like this, from having a purpose outside of raising my kids. I mean, it's the ultimate purpose. It's a wonderful job, and, but I think I needed something else. I needed something else to focus my brain on for a part of the day.
Yeah, no, and I hear you, and I feel like that is obviously a very personal decision for everybody, what is very personal for the mom, what's gonna be best for the family, all there's a lot that goes into those decisions, and I do feel like it's not such a black and white thing. Do I go to work? Do I stay at home? And I am happy to hear that more people are having it seems like there are more conversations happening around this sort of middle ground where and that's one of the reasons I sort of describe this podcast as being for career-minded moms, not just working moms
Yeah,
per se, because I really wanted to acknowledge that when we have kids, it can bring up a lot of questions in our career. And sometimes we do pivot and sometimes we do step back, but we still identify as those career women. And maybe we want to come back slowly. Maybe, it's different for everybody. And I think it's important to acknowledge that they're all challenging and they're all important roles. Um, so when you did end up going back, so you were stay at home, you said 8 years, you were having that itch to get back to work. What would
mhm.
you say was the hardest thing for you about that transition when you finally did slowly start to dip your toe in?
Yeah, well, again, I had the luxury of being able to volunteer first, and then I got hired after volunteering for some time. And so I was part-time, and so I worked 3 or 4 days a week from 9 to 3. And so I was still able to take my kids to school, I was still able to pick my kids up from school. But the job that I had required a lot of, evening and weekend work, and I think
Mm,
that was probably the most difficult part of transitioning for me, like, having one foot in, this nonprofit, this church that I'm working for, and then having one foot at home, it was hard to I always felt like I was missing out on something. Like, there's always
Mm,
work for a church, there's always something going on. You wear 10 different hats. There's events at night. You work all weekend. I ended up working there full time, and, eventually, I was working, 6, 7 days a week sometimes. So
mhm,
being part-time and only having one foot in each was a kind of a struggle. I know a lot of moms would be like, "Oh, please, eye roll. You had to work part-time." But what I mean by that is I was always, like, missing something at work, and then I was always
mhm,
missing at home,
mhm.
uh, because of the evening and weekend work.
Well, yeah, no, and I can absolutely empathize and relate to that. I mean, it was more when, we were dealing right in the middle of, COVID, when that was all happening, but I also spent a lot of time doing evening and weekend work, and I think that that is in a lot of ways harder because that's also when your kids are home. That's when they've got all these things going on. That's when, people typically think of nights and weekends as quote unquote like family time,
Yeah.
And so I imagine that probably brought up a lot of additional struggles as well.
Yeah, I felt a lot of guilt about that. My husband is wonderful and supportive, and he didn't mind. He loved hanging out with the kids at night and weekends. That was his time, right? Because he worked like
Right.
kind of 9 to 5, and so it worked well in the fact that we weren't hiring babysitters, you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
that part of it really did work out well, but I had guilt over missing stuff at home. And then when I was home, I had guilt that I couldn't attend certain events at work. So that was probably the hardest thing for me about the
Yeah.
trans.
And I do think that whether we're talking part-time, full-time, I think that that is something it doesn't matter what the balance is. I think that what you're talking about is very relatable to a lot of people, just this idea that if I'm at work, I'm not at home, and if I'm at home, I'm
Mhm.
not at work, and that can just bring up a lot of, like you said, a lot of guilt, a lot of difficult emotions. So one of the things that I'm curious about, you had mentioned that you found the one thing that drained you, out when you were working, when you were getting back into work every day was dealing with like these difficult people, these difficult personalities. Um, and that really tied in a lot to the burnout that you personally experienced. And
Mhm.
I'm wondering if you can maybe say more about that.
Yes, I will say more about that. Ugh. I kind of grew up in an environment where nobody talked about difficult things, and probably a lot of people are in that same boat, unless you were like Italian or from New York. I don't know. Maybe those people
Mhm.
tell all their feelings all the time, but I grew up in an environment where we did not discuss difficult things or deal with conflict directly, a lot of silent treatment, walking on eggshells, and I just thought that's what people do, and so I brought that with me into my marriage and into my workplace, and so when I say dealing with difficult people, it's probably more about me because I wasn't willing to speak up for myself, and not only did I learn that growing up that, that you're just be agreeable, be a peacekeeper, um, don't speak up, don't talk back, don't argue, right?
Mhm.
Not only did I learn that, but I'm also kinda wired that way, so I eventually started studying the DISC assessment. Are you familiar with this personality assessment called the DISC?
Well, just for our listeners, would you mind just sharing a little bit about it?
Sure, sure. I mean, you've done Myers-Briggs or
Yeah.
Enneagram or some of those. It's similar to that, but the DISC is my favorite because it just has 4 categories. So it's a little more simple than the Myers-Briggs or Enneagram. There's 4 categories of how people communicate and like to be communicated with. And,
Mhm.
those 4 categories are the D in DISC stands for direct. So one communication style is very direct, dominant, natural leader, maybe even a little aggressive. The I stands for influencing, and this is your, like, really friendly, outgoing, personable, warm, fun, energetic person. And that's where I fall. I'm a high I, and so I'm telling you all the good things about these disc
Mhm.
styles, but there's weaknesses for all of them too, so I'll come back to that.
Okay.
The S in disc stands for steady, so that's like your calm, patient. team player, loves to help people. A lot of nurses or S's, social workers. These are your helpers. They're a little more reserved and really team oriented. They care about people. Like they would be like the heart of an organization. Whereas the I would be like the energy of an organization, and the D would be like the results guy. Like we get stuff done. And then the C in DISC stands for careful or compliant. These are people that follow the rules,
Mhm.
love details, very
Mhm.
detail oriented, analytical, probably loves a good spreadsheet. Their house is probably immaculate. That's the C type. And generally, we express one or two of them higher than the other two. We express all four, right? Like I can do math
Right.
if I do, but it just makes me tired, right? So,
Yeah.
so that part of me that I'm I wired, which means I'm very social. And one of the weaknesses of someone who's I wired is that they really like and need to be included and they need to be liked.
Mhm.
Right. Feel that way and you've always thought it was a flaw, it's just how you're wired. I was so relieved when I learned that because I don't like that weakness, like, "Oh, I have to be liked by everybody." I don't wanna care what people think, but I did, and because of that, I really didn't deal with difficult people. Because if I was going to deal with someone who I was having a conflict with, like, then they weren't gonna like me, right, if I had to bring
Right.
up conflict. So not only did I grow up avoiding conflict, but then I was kinda wired for it as well.
Well, and that's the thing, right? Is to your point, I mean, every single, communication style, every single, personality trait, these things are not black and white. There are generally ways that they work very well for people. And then there are going to be drawbacks. There are going to be things that are going to, you know, create problems in some way, you
That's
know.
right.
And so I think that it's important for people just to like recognize that too, that these things are not very black and white. You had mentioned a couple minutes ago that when you were dealing with these quote unquote difficult people, that it was maybe more you. And
Mm.
I think one of the other thing that's important to mention is with obviously any interaction, with any, communication, there are of course two people. So yes, I would imagine it's a bit of both, right? So maybe you
Right.
are dealing with truly difficult people and also how you're interpreting it. I mean, there are a lot of people. I mean, a lot of people I know personally, clients that I've had who really do struggle with conflict, fear of upsetting people, afraid to set boundaries because they're not sure what the outcome is going to be, how the other person's going to react. And sometimes those concerns are very, maybe sometimes it is just a them thing. And other times those are very rational concerns, depending on who it is that they are talking to. Um, so you had also mentioned that not only were you struggling with, dealing with these difficult people, but you also said that sometimes you felt like you were the difficult one. So I'm curious if you can say more about that.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think that again, my personality is one in which I'm very sociable, I'm very emotional, like the I type on the disc. Um,
Mhm.
speak to disc a little bit because that's how my brain works now that I know about it. I'm very sociable, I'm emotional, I wear my heart on my sleeve. And then if you look at the D type, the first type that I mentioned, that's like that direct personality. They don't want any emotions. They are results oriented and they can be a little bossy. But but I'm difficult to them, right? And so when I
Mhm.
difficult person, what I think we really should be saying is complicated, right? A difficult person is someone who's not willing to change or hear feedback or, do anything for think about someone other than themselves. But most people are just complicated and we think they're difficult because they're wired differently than us and we don't understand that. And DISC gave me a very good understanding of that. And so the weaknesses of someone who is an I style. So for me personally, my weakness is I'm not a very good listener. I like to talk. I like to tell stories. I'm probably going to interrupt you a couple times during this podcast.
Right back at you.
Okay, good. In that case, I'm the difficult person, right? And I don't like to not be liked. So I'm a people pleaser. That makes me a difficult person. You're not doing your job well if you're just trying to please everybody. You're not pleasing anybody. So those were some of the ways that I found that I learned, like, oh, well, I'm difficult to him too. He's difficult to me because he's direct, super direct, and not sociable at all. He doesn't even say hi to me in the hallways. And then I learned he was a D, and I was like, oh, he's not a jerk.
Mhm.
He's just a D wired guy. So that was life changing information for me.
Well, and I love that reframe, from difficult to complicated because the word difficult has such a negative connotation to it. And so when we hear that, when we think about that, when we view a person that way, that is going to affect how we feel. That is going to affect the way that we approach them. That is going to affect, so many things. And just by using that reframe, it completely shifts the perspective to one that's maybe more empathetic, understanding. And that's, of course, going to affect the way that you um, approach a conversation as well, right? Because I think that it's really important to recognize that when we go into a conversation, a big piece of this is what we are any assumptions we're making from the interaction, those sorts of things. So,
Yes, we make a lot of assumptions. Yes.
yes, we do make a lot of assumptions, and so I love that reframe. So I'm curious, like, what made you ultimately decide to really start studying these communication styles, these perspectives, motivation, all of that?
Well, when you work for the church, there there's a bit of an expectation on your behavior, right? And so you go in thinking like this is going to be such a great environment to work in because they're church people. And if you're wise, you know that church people are also humans too.
Yes. Mhm.
Um, and so there was an expectation that this would be an easier environment to work in. But it's not. And because of that, I think everybody kind of recognizes that. And so the church that I worked for invested heavily in our leadership development. And so we went to conferences every year. We took, if we wanted to take an online class or we could buy as many books as we wanted to read. And I kind of am a sucker for like a lot of that psychology, self-helpy kind of stuff. Like I loved it back when, Oprah started talking about it in the 90s. Um, but when I really decided to start studying it is when I was managing about 8 people and who took care of about 6 different, like, big programs, at my work. 3 of the people on my team were 20 and
Mm,
hadn't one hadn't gone to college at all, doesn't matter, you can do
mhm,
work without going to college, and 2 were in college, but they were young, and when I was 20, I was kind of a mess, I didn't speak up for myself, I didn't know how to communicate well, and I just wasn't doing a good job of managing them. I didn't understand them. I thought everybody would is like me. Doesn't everybody
mhm,
work like I work? Like, I'm Gen X. I learned to work this way, right? Like, we Gen X is like workaholics traditionally. And then I'm working with some Gen Z who, they have better boundaries than Gen X does. They wanna do meaningful work, and
mm,
they just have different perspectives, just like Gen X
mhm,
did to the generation before us.
mhm,
And so when I was working with those young people, I was feeling it. I was like, "I am not leading them well." And so I started to just study everything I could get my hands on because I wanted to do it well. I love young people, and
mhm,
I wanted to lead them well, and, so I started taking courses and going to conferences, and I got some coaching. Getting some coaching was probably one of the best things I ever did, was getting some like, some executive leader coaching.
mhm. Yeah, no, and I think that it's fantastic that you recognized that difference, like, with the with the generations, and instead of just being like, "This is a them problem," really asking questions
Yeah.
about where is the problem and how can I do things differently? Like, what can I do about this? Because I do think, when we talk about the importance of our perspectives, the way that we think about things is learned, and those lessons come from so many different places, including through generations, societal expectations, the things that we're being taught from our parents, and so those things do shift, and so it is very common for that to be, for values, for beliefs, for, the way that we view these situations to change from generation to generation. But
Yeah,
rather than just pointing fingers, which I think so many people do, you took that step back and you just kind of, like, asked the question with curiosity. And it sounds like that really sort of led you to a lot of learning.
Yes. Yes. I asked one of my coworkers, I said, "Hey, what's it like to be on the other side of me?" And she's like, "Oh, you really wanna know?" I was like, "I do." And then she told me, I was like, "Oh, I have some work to do. Thank you for your honesty."
I imagine that that was probably a difficult question to ask, but it sounds like you were open to the feedback, which
I
is
was you have to
that's
ask
generous.
somebody you truly trust that question. You can't ask somebody you're not close to that question, someone you really trust.
But you also have to be open to hearing the answer. You also have to be open
Yeah.
to the feedback and even recognizing that it might not be what you want to hear, but there's a reason that you're asking it to begin with.
Yeah.
So I'm curious. So as you started to study these things, the communication styles, perspectives, and motivation, what were some of the most surprising things that you learned?
Well, I think the most surprising thing that I learned is that people are wired so differently. I just didn't maybe it's how I'm wired. I did not pay attention enough to know, like, "Oh, okay, my coworker who is a C type," because we all did the disc, so we knew each other's disc. My coworker who's a C type is gonna want all the details and all the data when we walk into this meeting, and I don't know any of the details because I hate details. I like the big picture, but I
Mhm.
better look over the details before I walk into the meeting with him so I can provide what he needs for us to make this decision. So I think the most surprising thing to me was learning that you can adapt your communication style to someone
Mhm.
else without changing who you are, but
Right.
just adapting for the good of the team and for the good of getting the work done. And that was something that I didn't understand. I'm very independent and free-spirited, and so, that was surprising to me.
Well, okay, and so with that in mind, I'm curious, how did understanding and learning about your own communication style change things for you?
Yeah, right, it's one thing to read about it, right, and learn about it, and then it's all
Yeah.
another thing to implement it,
Right.
and so I'm gonna tell you about the first time I really implemented listening better. So that's probably one of my biggest weaknesses is I'm just not a good listener. And when you're not a good listener, then no people don't feel heard, obviously. They
Right.
don't feel heard and seen and loved and known. And that's, you know, deepest human desire to be known, seen, and loved. So I had another person on my team who was about 30 years old. So again, like millennial, different generation than me. And she was very different than me. She's probably the opposite in every way to me and how I work and how we communicate. Um and so we had conflict, but I didn't know what it was. You know how like conflict just starts to brew and then you
Yeah.
let it go and then it's simmering and I let it
Oh,
go for way
yeah.
because I need to be liked. And then I thought, okay, this can't keep happening. It started to affect the whole team. There was an attitude in meetings and I mean, you don't need all those details, but it started affecting the whole team. And then I started hearing from like the whole staff that something's off. You need to talk. So I finally was like, all right, let me get in a room with my boss and with her and let's just hash it out. And I knew enough. I was self-aware enough to know that it must be something about my leadership style. And we got in the room and so I had done enough learning and I was trying to implement this particular skill of being able to listen. And so with my coach, I had worked on the idea of not being defensive no matter what she said. I wasn't going to
Mhm.
defend myself. I was just going to listen. So the only thing I was allowed to do was ask questions.
Mm.
And that, oh my God, that is an underrated skill. Ask questions. And so we got in the room and she was like, everything's fine. I'm fine. I'm fine. I'm fine. And then like 20 minutes in, I just said, like, it really seems like, we've lost trust or I've lost trust. You've lost trust in me as a leader. And so she told me and she spent like about 30 minutes telling me all the things from the past 2 years that I had done wrong in her eyes. And had I not prepared, I would have struck back. It was very hurtful. Some of it was true, right? When someone gives you feedback, a lot of it's true, some of it's not true, but there certainly were some nuggets in there that I could learn from, but it was not done kindly in any way. Um, and so I only asked questions. It may be the only time I've ever done that, but all I did was questions. "Okay, tell me more about that. Can you say more about that? Okay. Is there anything else you want me to know?" That's probably the most difficult thing I've done.
Sure, yeah, but it sounds like it really helped, you know, helped her open up and it helped you get the answers to the questions that you were really looking. Because it sounds like you were really looking for that feedback. You were wanting to learn, and that's the thing, right? It's when we ask again, when we ask these questions, we have to do it with this curiosity, with this understanding that maybe we're not gonna hear what we wanna hear, and just remembering that the reasons we're asking those questions to begin with, right? The we asked for this, you know? So I imagine that that was really hard.
It was
Now oh, go ahead, I'm sorry.
No, I just said it was really difficult.
Yeah. So now I'm thinking about the moms who are listening to the podcast, right? And I'm going to change, I'm going to use your reframe from before, and I'm not going to talk about complicated or I'm sorry, not difficult personalities, but we're going to talk about complicated personalities,
Right.
right? Complicated people. Um, so when we talked about how a big piece of this is how we go into the conversations, our mindsets, our perspectives, our assumptions, all of that. And a lot of those things are much more difficult to really sort of feel in control of when we are super stressed, when we are burned out, when we're high emotion, high energy, all of those things. And so I'm curious, like, why do you think dealing with these complicated personalities does feel so much harder for people who are in that dysregulated state?
Mm. Yeah, well, I'm not a burnout expert, so I will just speak to my own experience. But I think it's because don't I didn't always know what gave me energy and what drained my energy.
Hmm.
So I didn't manage my time well. And so most of us don't think that it's a time management issue, but for me, it was kind of a time management issue, more of a self-management issue that I would I wanna do work that's most focused and most difficult at my best time of day, and I discovered my best time of day is between, like, 7 a.m. and 11 a.m. I'm like, "Oh, okay." And so I started doing that, like, so if I had to have a difficult conversation, I have to do it in the morning because in the afternoon,
Mm,
I'm already tired, and that is gonna drain me dry. And so I think knowing your best time of day, like we all have a best time of day, we all have a worst time of day, and then everything else falls in the middle, right?
right,
And so if I had to do something really difficult, I want to do it during my best time of day when I have the most energy, because otherwise I just continue to drain and drain and drain myself. A difficult conversation drains anybody,
right,
right?
absolutely.
You know, math drains me. So I would have to do math first and I hate math. And so like that's one of the ways that I think it just makes life so much harder if you're already burned out. You're already exhausted then. I mean, you're already exhausted. And
Right, yeah.
how do you get energy? You have to go back to where you get your energy or your rest.
Well, then and again, another piece of this I feel like is when we're super stressed, when we are burned out, again, it has an effect on not only us emotionally, but it has an effect on our mindset. It has an effect on the way that we're going into these conversations. One of the things that you were talking about earlier is how important it is to well, you sharing your experience about not being allowed to be defensive, right? And just asking the questions. And so
Mhm.
I'm curious, if somebody is already sort of maybe feeling a little bit defensive going into the conversation, they're already sort of prepared for that or
Yep.
feeling that. What do you feel like is an important mindset shift or a helpful mindset shift? Something that this person could tell herself to help reduce that, to help prepare herself for that
Mhm.
conversation.
Yeah. Oh, that's such a great question. You've used the word a lot during our conversation already, but turning to curiosity
Hmm.
is the mindset that you most want to have. It's really difficult to turn to curiosity when you're mad or feeling defensive. But if you can just master that pause, right? The moment that you pause before you walk into the conversation. Master the pause and think to yourself, I wonder why they're so upset with me. I wonder why they're behaving like that. Just turning to curiosity because we always think we know, right? The human brain finishes the story for us. And I mean, 99 out of 100 times we do not get it right. And
Mm-hmm.
I think turning to curiosity, if you can master that pause and be willing to ask a few questions, and if you're willing to answer with the phrases like, "Oh, I hear you. I understand."
Yeah.
The mirroring, if you're willing to answer just in the first couple minutes of this meeting, right? Let them be heard. And then you can, I don't know, tell your side of the story if you need to, but I really think we don't always need to do that in a conflict.
Yeah.
Um,
No, and I love that you said that, and I agree with you 100%. I mean, the reason you heard me say it so much already today is because it's something I very much believe in. It's something that I tell people all the time. One, I think it's important to recognize, to your point, we don't know all the answers, and it is amazing how many assumptions we make without recognizing or realizing that we're doing it. And so, yes, having that awareness, recognizing that we don't have all the information, we don't necessarily know what's going to happen, we don't know how a person is going to respond, or any of these things. That's really where assumptions come from, right? It's not having all the information and maybe thinking that we do. And
right.
so, having that, yes, exploring things with curiosity is so important, right? Just
Oh, yeah.
sometimes we get really surprised with the things we think we know, and then we find out we actually don't know.
Yeah. Yeah. I,
Mhm.
I will tell you one thing about that Brene Brown always says, and I love this so much. Hey, can I just talk to you for a second? The story I'm telling myself is blah, blah, blah. Right. And so you're actually telling the other person, like, I'm making this assumption because you said this. The story I'm telling myself is this. Is that true? And most of the time, they're probably gonna be like, "Oh, no, 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 that's not what I meant. I meant this." And you'll be like, "Oh, okay." And then the conflict is gone like that. And
Mhm.
so I think if we just could add, like, some of those, like, little sentences to our vocabulary and say them more often, like, "Say more about that," is a great thing. Everyone wants to say more about about their idea,
Yeah.
whatever it is. "Say more about that. Tell me more." Just kind of being willing to wait your turn, I guess, which I'm not
Yeah.
always.
Well, and I love how you use it as, you talk about doing that as just sort of a way to set the stage for the conversation,
Mhm.
and allowing that person the chance to respond and to, correct any misunderstandings or assumptions that maybe are being made. Another thing that I'm wondering about though, so even before having the conversation, let's say, we talked a lot, we were just talking a minute ago about assumptions and how they affect the way we approach a conversation. So for a person who is anticipating a difficult conversation or isn't, knowing that they're going to be in an uncomfortable situation, maybe I'm going to bring up something that they really don't want to, have to bring up. How can they mentally prepare themselves before going into that sort of, so that maybe they are in a better place to be less defensive and be more curious?
Mm, okay, well, one thing that I did, again, I'm not an expert on burnout, but or dysregulation, but one thing that I did was I would get away from my desk at least once a day, and I would find a quiet place at my work, and I would do, like, a 5-minute meditation on a meditation app. Just breathe. Sometimes I would just take a walk around the building. Um, when you take a deep breath, those muscles in your lungs that move when you're taking the deep breath send a signal to your brain that everything's okay. You're safe,
Mhm.
right? There's not a tiger chasing you. All is well. And that is how you can regulate yourself with your breath in 5 minutes.
Right.
So that would be my first recommendation, I guess. And then, I mean, that's a small thing, right? And then the other thing is just, I would always have like a notebook in front of me with like a couple of those phrases on it. Say more about that. How can I help you? Or help me understand. That's a great one too. Help me understand why you feel that way. Help me understand why you did it that way instead of the way I asked you to do it or whatever it might be. But help me understand. Say more about that. Just that turn again, you're just turning to curiosity. And so if you have something in front of you that reminds you, oh, I should ask a couple questions, then I feel like that's helpful.
Yeah, yeah. No, I agree with that. And then I think just to sort of piggyback off of that, just sort of this reminder that we're going into this conversation and we don't know how the other person's going to respond. We don't know how they're going to react. We don't like, if we're telling ourselves the worst is going to happen, we don't know that the worst is going to happen. Maybe the best is going to happen. Maybe things will be uncomfortable. It's comfortable, and that's maybe not pleasant, but it's still okay. We can deal with discomfort, but just sort of those reminders too. And then when you talk about like regulation, breathing, preparing yourself that way, I think that that is a great point, and also one to remember for after the conversation, because sometimes conversations leave
Mm.
us feeling in a stressful, dysregulated state. And so taking that time to do some of those things to help us come down from that afterwards can be really important too.
Yes, I love a good body scan, like getting into your body, getting out of your head and into your body. Those are my favorites.
Yeah, yeah, no, absolutely. So, all right. So I feel like you've shared so much today, and I really, really appreciate it. And I'm sure that we could probably talk about this all day. I mean, there's so much to talk about when it comes to communication and whatnot. For people who do want to, learn more about you, learn more about the work that you do, where can they go to do that?
Yeah, so I'm most active on LinkedIn, I would say. I also have a YouTube channel and I'm on Facebook a little bit, but LinkedIn is probably where, if you want to interact with me, that would be great. I have a leadership speaking, training, and coaching business, and I do have a website. It's kellylippenholz.com, and Lippenholz is Lippenholz. Uh,
Okay.
that could be a tough one to spell. Holz, no T in there. Just sounds like it. Um, but yeah, so you can go to my website to learn more about what I do, and if you want to strike up a conversation, I love to talk. Hit me up on LinkedIn.
Okay, sounds great. So I will, of course, as always, make sure that that information is included in the show notes for anybody who wants to learn more about you or the work that you do. So before we wrap up for today, I always like to ask everybody, if you could leave the listeners with one final message, one final piece of advice, what would it be?
Be a great question asker,
Mm.
and then
Mhm.
shut up and listen.
Okay, wonderful. Well, thank you again. I really, really appreciate this. I think this has been a great conversation. Very, very valuable. Communication is obviously such an important part of our lives. Um, and then, as always, for the moms listening, if any of this resonates, if you did find these things that we talked about to be helpful or valuable, please look up Kelly and the work that she does. Please share this podcast with other moms that could maybe use some additional support, because we are all in this together.
Yes. Thank you, Christy.